Welcome to Wilder Wolves Hall of Fame Mode Fandom. My name is Wilder Adams, and I'm recording here in Las Vegas the day after the Minnesota Timberwolves defeated the Denver Nuggets 94-83. And forgive me, I don't remember whether the Timberwolves played the Nuggets last Summer League, but counting this Summer League game, last regular season, and last postseason, Minnesota Timberwolves have defeated the Denver Nuggets 7 times in a row, cementing the reality that the Timberwolves have owned the Denver Nuggets for the last 15 months. And it was a great game. Minnesota had full control of this game from start to finish, and it was really highly impressive the way they played. This episode is going to be a solo episode. I am going to break down my biggest takeaways from this Summer League game and how that kind of builds into the team for next season in that context. And then later in the show, I'm going to also add to some new takeaways I have from the Mark Lowry and A-Rod ownership after they've had their introductory conference as the official owners of the team now in Las Vegas yesterday from when I'm recording this. And there was a lot of cool takeaways. A lot of the values and takes they had were what we've heard from in the past, but I thought they've done some pretty cool things aligning with those values that I want to talk about later in the show. But let's get started with this episode. I think the number one place we have to start with after this game is, of course, Terrence Shannon Jr. continues to look fantastic. He had 24 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists yesterday, following up that 26-9 game against the Pelicans the other day. And Terrence Shannon, he's just been unbelievable. And this is exactly what the Minnesota Timberwolves could have hoped for him, because he's coming into his age 25 season. He's not a young pup. He is a year 2 player, but somebody that we really hope can take that next step in the rotation next year. And he's just been so impressive all around. First of all, I just want to say the guy has been gunning 3-pointers this Summer League. He shot 23 3-pointers his first 2 games. And granted, he hasn't shot great. He shot 5 for 14 yesterday, 2 for 9 the other day. But the fact that he's gunning them, he's hit some pretty tough shots off the dribble. Yesterday, he hit this little jab, I think, and then a little crossover, step back 3 to the corner. That is not an easy shot. And he was hitting that. He was hitting really tough shots against the New Orleans Pelicans the other day and dominated the first half, 17 points. And I just think Terrence Shannon, he's proving he's too good for Summer League. He's officially hit the too good for Summer League category with the way he's played lately, because not only has he been a tough shot maker, but he has just been the entire engine for this Minnesota Timberwolves Summer League team. His first game, 9 assists. Second game, 3 assists. That's a big disparity in assists from game 1 to game 2. But the common denominator is Terrence Shannon is just feeling the game out. He is pressuring the rim. He is getting others involved. He is consistently making the right reads. And this has been kind of a build on from what he did last year, because I was pleasantly surprised by the way Terrence Shannon can really move the ball despite kind of his one-speed style. He plays really fast. He really wants to go downhill, go in transition. He's Minnesota's best transition player, but he's also very good in chaos, pushing the ball out, finding the rolling man. He's really impressive for his archetype, the way he can move the basketball at his pace. And yes, he's too good for Summer League, but I'll take this a step further on the Terrence Shannon Jr. agenda. If I had to pick, and I'm not the head coach, okay? I'm not Chris Finch, obviously, but if I were the coach and I had to pick the starting backcourt mate next to Anthony Edwards next year, at this point in time, July 13th, a lot can change, I would pick Terrence Shannon Jr. next to Anthony Edwards. And that might sound crazy. No true point guard in the starting lineup. That sounds risky. We've seen how valuable Mike Conley's ability to just set the table has been for that Minnesota offense. But Mike Conley, I personally have concerns about, number one, of course, the regression on how he's played. 4 points a game in the conference finals, barely over 20% from the field. You just can't have that when you're trying to compete for a championship. But also, look at Oklahoma City, what they did last year. Oklahoma City, Shea is one of the best players in the NBA. He is the primary heliocentric creator for the Oklahoma City Thunder. But I would not call him a true point guard. There are times, even last postseason, where some of his playmaking limitations affected him, especially against teams like Denver, against Minnesota, that one game 3. There's games where you can take out his playmaking, but he's a good enough playmaker to be a number one. And I think there's a world Anthony Edwards can be good enough to be that heliocentric playmaker who gets just enough reads when you also combine the fact that Julius Randle is a good passer. I think Jaylen has solid feel, and I think Terrence Shannon really has solid feel. Minnesota's playmaking is a question if you go with Terrence Shannon in the starting lineup, but this would be trust in Anthony Edwards taking that playmaking leap, but also Terrence Shannon providing enough playmaking connectivity to make that thing work. And I think he can do that. If Anthony Edwards can take that leap as a primary playmaker, I think Terrence Shannon is a good enough connected passer to put those two next to each other. And you build up on the Oklahoma City fact. Oklahoma City, Minnesota didn't have enough rim pressurers against the Oklahoma City Thunder in last postseason. They couldn't get to the rim consistently outside of Ant, and it really affected what Ant and Randle can do. Terrence Shannon is arguably the best rim attacker on the Minnesota Timberwolves. He provides a 6'6" frame. He provides just amazing physicality, and I think that is a fantastic anecdote to what a team like Oklahoma City brings to the table, because they're going to throw bodies at you, and you just need guys who can do something with the basketball. And I think Terrence Shannon can do that. And I think ideally, in the ideal world, Rob Dillingham can be that guy, and Minnesota has Rob Dillingham be that playmaker. But we'll talk about him in a minute. But at this point in time, I have more confidence in Terrence Shannon Jr. providing a consistent impact in that starting lineup compared to Rob and Mike Conley. And the next guy who I would consider in that conversation is, of course, Donte DiVincenzo. But even he, like we've talked about, when you put a lot of pressure on him in the perimeter, Donte DiVincenzo struggles creating off the dribble. He struggles finding an impact when he has some of that de facto point guard responsibility. And Terrence Shannon might have that issue. He might have that issue. But I think with the way this roster is constructed right now, there's a massive deficiency at point guard. It makes sense to try out a Terrence Shannon Jr. at the combo guard position next to Anthony Edwards. And just the modern NBA, there's less of that, just you need that true point guard. And I think Minnesota has really benefited from a true point guard. But I'm betting personally on Anthony Edwards taking another step next year as a decision maker, and also putting trust in Terrence Shannon and what he provides outside of his playmaking, while having just enough trust into him figuring it out. My primary dream is still Minnesota trying to figure out what can they do at point guard outside of the roster. Can they bring in a Malcolm Brogdon? Can they bring in somebody who can just provide some playmaking as a true point guard, who I might trust a little more than Mike Conley going into next year? And I love what Mike Conley has done as a Timberwolves leader, and I think he has value even next year. But I do think Minnesota needs more solutions at point guard. And if they don't provide another solution, I just say, you know what? Let's get Terrence Shannon in the starting lineup and figure it out. I think he's proven he's too good for Summer League. And I think he's also proven he has enough playmaking to really be an interesting combo guard, potentially the backcourt mate of the future next to Anthony Edwards, if they can figure out that playmaking. And I think they possibly could. Now, I also want to talk about Rob Dillingham, because Dillingham, he had a better game yesterday against the Nuggets. 15 points, 9 assists, 6 for 15 shooting. Still not great efficiency, but a little built up from yesterday. And Rob hasn't, of course, he hasn't really popped on the screen, which is a little disappointing. I listened to Kyle and Dane on the Dane Moore NBA podcast, and they said it well. If Rob Dillingham was in his rookie year and he played the way he did his last 2 games, I would feel pretty good about that. But when I see guys like Ron Holland and Reed Shepard, Jaylen Tyson, Terrence Shannon Jr., these guys who are going into year 2, balling out, and Rob Dillingham hasn't fully put it together, that's a little bit concerning for me. And that's partially why I'm like, you know what? If Rob Dillingham isn't ready yet, year 2, and it takes some time for point guards to figure it out, there you go. Let's figure out the Terrence Shannon Jr. thing, because Rob Dillingham, if he isn't ready to start at point guard next year and you start him and then he struggles and you bench him, that's a lot more alarming than him easing his way into the starting lineup eventually. But when watching the game yesterday, Rob Dillingham, I thought he moved the ball pretty well. And we've seen the last couple summer leagues, Minnesota really emphasizing having Rob Dillingham run the offense. And his last 2 games, he's had 15 assists, so 7.5 assists a game in the summer league. Not too bad. You can kind of still see it, though, when you watch him play. He hasn't fully bridged the using the playmaking to complement the scoring and the scoring to complement the playmaking. It feels kind of one-dimensional, like if I'm going to score, I'm going to score. I'm going to take a tough shot off the dribble. And sometimes he hits those. Or he's really trying to play make. And you're like, okay, Rob, let's be a little more assertive in those situations. And I think he did some good thing yesterday. Like the 9 assists are very good. I thought he moved the ball well. I thought the first half he shot well. He had some really tough shots off the dribble. In the second half, those tough shots off the dribble weren't falling. And, they were rolling out. They weren't bad misses, but of course, we would hope Rob Dillingham, as the summer league goes on, is more efficient so we can have that confidence like, okay, next year, hopefully at some point, he can take a major step in the efficiency standpoint and also find a way to bridge that playmaking, bridge that scoring together and be, an offensive creator, kind of in the vision of a Trae Young. I think that's like the dream of Rob Dillingham. I'm not saying he's Trae Young, but that would be a great outcome if he can kind of bridge together that archetype. And credit to him, I thought in the second half yesterday, he really had moments where he was fighting defensively. And even if Rob Dillingham isn't a good defender, one thing I do respect about him as a basketball player is that even when he makes mistakes defensively or he's just physically overwhelmed, he tries. And that try factor, I think, is valuable in a Minnesota defensive culture if and when that offensive productivity builds up. Because I still have pretty good confidence in Rob Dillingham becoming a good point guard in the NBA. And listening to Dane Moore NBA podcast and listening to Kyle, it sounds like the Timberwolves do have good confidence in Rob Dillingham's future still, which is, I think, a pretty good sign. And he's so young and you invested so much into him. I think it's a good thing that they still have confidence, but it would be nice. It would be very nice seeing Rob Dillingham build up like he did game 1 to game 2 and having an explosive game 3, game 4, and just for the duration of Summer League. I would love to see Rob Dillingham take another step throughout the Summer League, because if we go into the regular season next season and his first couple games, I don't know the exact efficiency he's shooting, but I think it's in the 30% from the field range, 30 to 40, a little under 40. If we're going into next year and we're like, yeah, he struggled to score and shoot in Summer League and didn't fully bridge together the playmaking and shooting, that would be moderately concerning for me going into next year. So Dillingham did build off of game 1 and played better game 2, but I definitely would like to see more as we head into game 3. Now let's shift to Johan Beringer, because he didn't have quite the same statistically dominant game that he had game 1 relative to this recent game. But I thought Beringer was really good. I thought he was really good. He only had 7 points, 7 rebounds, and a block. But he had an impactful game, sort of in the way that Rudy Gobert does, where he didn't dominate statistically, but you could just watch the game and track the analytics, And you could tell he scared the living heck out of that Denver offense. He had a near plus 38 net rating, I believe, from this game. He had an 89 defensive rating and like 127 offensive rating this game. He had the highest net rating on the team and only one block, but teams weren't testing him the way the Pelicans were. Of course, the Pelicans learned the hard way. In the first quarter, he had like 5 blocks the first 8 minutes. He didn't have nearly the same opportunity that he did game one to get blocks. But that Denver Nuggets offense really struggled when Beringer was on the floor. They weren't testing him. He was rotating well. He played really hard. And offensively, he didn't provide a lot offensively. That's not something that we can really expect from Beringer, but we can really appreciate how hard he runs. He got that alley-oop really early in the game from Rob Dillingham. And late in the game, we started to see more activity on the boards. One thing I would like to see more from Beringer is it feels like he started game one and game two really slowly on the glass, right? I don't remember how many boards he had game one in the first half, but it felt like early on in that first quarter, he wasn't super like active on the glass. And the first few quarters this game, he was hanging on only a couple and few rebounds. And I think there's a lot of analysts who can say exactly why, but just from watching from the stands, it looks like, he was going out in the perimeter a little bit. He plays super hard. Maybe he can work on his like positioning, like boxing out when getting rebounds. I don't doubt the motor when he gets on the glass, but it felt like maybe positioning and just instincts, just getting to the right spots to get those rebounds. I feel like there's another like 2 or 3 years of what he can be on the glass from what we've seen the first couple games because of how quick twitched he is, how explosive he is, and how hard he plays. Those are 3 very good foundations for a young center to have when talking about long-term rebounding potential, because the guy has like a 7'4.5" wingspan. So he has the length, he has the size. Seeing him throughout the summer league, it would be great to see that activity on the glass take a step up. He was super active on the glass in the fourth quarter of this last game. And I'm not sure how much of it was like Minnesota had control over the game and rebounds became easier at the end, or he figured it out late. But that is something I want to see from Beringer. I'm not going to worry too much about like what is his presence like on the block or if he adds a jumper. He did say in one of his interviews yesterday, he is comfortable pulling up from mid-range. And we saw like Matt Lloyd say that during the draft, like after drafting Beringer. Like coaches have said they swear he has a jumper. And we saw that little push shot game one. And there were a couple times last year in Europe where he did take a midi and it did go in. So we'll see how much of that is true. But overall, I thought his defense was incredibly impactful. I thought his energy, his feel, all of those really stood out. And of course, the analytics stood by that. And I think this is super exciting for Beringer, the fact that it feels like the impact in his game is already bigger than his numbers, because for somebody who's only played basketball for 4 years, you would maybe somewhat assume, if you haven't watched him, that his feel for the game would be a little behind. But that hasn't been the story at all these first 2 summer league games. His defensive instincts have been impeccable. His motor has been impeccable. Of course, he's a little jumpy, but it really hasn't bothered him in summer league. And often with like bigs in summer league, it seems like they struggle with the speed and with the foul trouble. And there's a reason why the foul limit's like 10 in summer league, because it's so easy to foul when you're adjusting to the speed of the NBA. But that hasn't been an issue for Beringer at all these first 2 games. So these first 2 games, he's given you 9 points a game, 4.5 blocks, 7.5 rebounds. I think this is about as good as you could have dreamed of for somebody who's an incredibly gifted project doing in the first 2 games of Summer League. So he wasn't as dominant on the box score as he was game one, but the eye test for me and just the overall analytics, they really stood out to me. And I'm incredibly optimistic about Beringer. And I did not think there was ever going to be a world where he would be in the rotation next year. And I'm not saying he's going to be in the rotation, nor am I necessarily saying he should yet. But that is now a story that I think we all as Wolves fans should watch. Like, can he get into the rotation next year and how quickly? And at the bare minimum, I feel like as Rudy gets into his mid-30s, right, he's going to his age 33 season, I believe, next year. If he's out a few games or needs rest, at the bare minimum, I do feel pretty good at this point in time on what day is it? July 13th, that Beringer could at least come into the rotation and bring some of what Rudy Gobert gives you. So he had sort of a Rudy Gobert game where the box score didn't stand out, but the analytics and the impact, they really did. And moving on to some other guys, Jaylen Clark didn't shoot great, 2 for 9, but I believe he had 3 stocks yesterday. And the defense with Jaylen Clark is always going to be there. He doesn't have the highly scalable game where he plays lower competition and suddenly he averages 25 like Terrence Shannon. But I thought, despite his struggles shooting the basketball, his defense is ridiculous. His feel for the game is ridiculous. And I do think for him to really, because I think Terrence Shannon Jr. is starting to become inevitable, for him to take like a legitimate 15 minutes a game role next year, he's going to have to shoot well from 3 like he did his rookie year. He shot over 40% from 3 last year. That needs to be real for him if he wants to be in that Timberwolves rotation. And it hasn't been thus far this summer league. And throughout summer league, I am really hopeful that shooting kind of bridges to the mean and he starts shooting well enough to justify that 15 minute stint for the Timberwolves next year. But I also feel solid about Jaylen Clark, the way he defends, his motor, his feel, like Beringer for guards, that really stood out. And I thought he played solid. Denver scored 83 points, which I think is pretty good for Summer League. Like I said, everything goes down. Summer League's a little more ugly compared to NBA basketball, but thought he defended well. Thought his decision-making was good. Just has to start making shots. And Leonard Miller, I don't think he stood out yesterday either. 2 for 9 from the field. His defense, it feels like whenever he gets attacked, it feels like it's a foul. Like Beringer, I feel good about Beringer altering the shot or blocking the shot. But at this point with Leonard Miller, it feels like when he gets attacked, he's going to foul. And that's been a problem. And shot 2 for 5 from 3. Struggled inside the 3-point line yesterday. But I want to see Leonard Miller kind of bring that fire back, that sparkle back that he had in his first summer league. Because when Leonard Miller got drafted by Minnesota in 2023, 33rd overall, the narrative was like, how did Leonard Miller fall to Minnesota in the first place? And that first summer league, he was wildly impressive. I thought genuinely he was one of the best rookies in that summer league. And he hasn't grown on that very much the last couple of years, which has been something to look out for. I think with the way Beringer is playing right now, it's going to be very interesting to see how that affected Leonard Miller's odds of being in the rotation next year. Because my initial, of course, I'm not the coach, but just watching from the bird's eye point of view, Leonard Miller, I thought, had a chance to be in the rotation next year, and he still does, I'm sure. But with the way Beringer is playing and the way Leonard Miller is still struggling a little bit, I'm not sure if his odds are increasing by any stretch of the imagination right now. So sort of like Rob, it would be very encouraging to see a legitimately fruitful 23-point game or something. Miller had 20 points the first game, but I didn't feel like that 20 points was impactful as the stat line suggested. I didn't think he played that well game 1, and I don't think he played that well yesterday. So I think Leonard Miller, like I said Friday on Wolves Fandom Friday, and by the way, if you guys want to jump on that show, leave me a DM and I'll have you on. But it didn't feel that impactful, and Little concerned about that, but didn't matter yesterday because Shannon's looked great. And to continue on some other players to talk about, Tristan Newton has struggled a little bit. I liked him a lot when Minnesota claimed him after, getting him early in the year in January. He is an interesting player because, he was a great college player, big guard, defensive minded. He's really struggled creating offensively these first two games. And I'm not sure how to feel about that. I don't think he's going to be, high level offensive player if he stays with the Timberwolves on a two-way for another year or two. And he had a better game yesterday. He had 12 points, but the offense struggling a little bit there. And yeah, that's kind of the main takeaway. I thought Zikarsky, only played 9 minutes. I thought he had a solid stint. He had a really interesting bounce pass to a cutter off the back door. And Anthony Edwards at the game was like, damn, he can pass like that too? Ant was kind of learning about Zikarsky in real time, it sounds like. And that it's kind of cool to see Ant kind of learn about his own players kind of in real time in that summer league type environment. Zikarsky also had some more flashes of what I believe to be pretty good NBA level touch. He had this little roll and he threw this little floater, nothing but net. And I think Zikarsky in the NBA hasn't played a lot, but I do think that his touch is a legitimate thing. And obviously he's a massive human being. And I was, wondering if he would play a little more than he has, but he's also competing against Jess Edwards, who was more efficient this game than game one as well. Jesse Edwards. And yeah, I just think it's going to be fun to see Zikarsky's growth as well. And overall, really good Minnesota Timberwolves game, 94-83. They had control of that game from pretty early on. Clearly the more talented core compared to the Denver Nuggets in terms of young talent. So Minnesota, they did what they did. Shannon looked great. He had an amazing first half. And we saw some good signs from Dillingham, really good signs from Beringer, I thought. And, but the nice thing is they played well, they won, and there's still a lot of meat on the bone. What can we see from Leonard Miller? What can we see from efficiency-wise from Rob Dillingham? Can, we get a little more from Tristan Newton? There's a lot of guys from top to bottom. Amari Bailey, what can they provide? Because Amari also struggled with efficiency. So Minnesota didn't have the super efficient offensive game, and they still really controlled it. And from just, hearing the interviews of the team, it sounds like they're seriously going for this. They're going for the Summer League championship. And pathetically on my end, if Minnesota won the Summer League championship, that would be one of the 10 greatest moments as a fan for me. And I'm sure for many of us. So I'm all here for it. I'm all here for Minnesota qualifying for the championship game and going for it. I think they have a legitimate chance and they have a lot of room to grow. They play the Detroit Pistons on Tuesday, I believe, Tuesday afternoon. And it's going to be fun seeing Rob Dillingham against Ron Holland, who was the 5th pick in 2024, and see if Rob Dillingham and Ron Holland see who plays better. Because Ron had an amazing game one, and Dillingham is starting to ease in, hasn't really stood out in Summer League yet, but it would be a great game for Rob Dillingham to really show out. I also want to close out and just talk about I'll talk a little bit about some new things that stood out to me with the owners, because if you want a more in-depth episode about what to hope and expect from the owners, I had a recording with Kyle Teige a little less than 2 weeks ago you can watch. We talked a lot about the ownership at the end of that episode. But I will say 2 things that stood out to me. Number one, they are definitely all in on providing innovation to the Minnesota Timberwolves organization. And we already have an example of that with Jump. And this is not a promo of their new product, but this concept of tickets, their pricing is going to continuously be updated throughout the game. And if somebody leaves the game and you want to get a closer ticket and you can pay to move up and get closer to the stands, that is an incredibly exciting and innovative concept that when I heard about it, and we hear new ideas all the time, and not all of them sound great, or they might sound good, and then you just like kind of brush it off and maybe forget about it. The jump concept really stood out to me. And I think it's super cool that both A-Rod and Mark Lowry invented and are running this product, because I think this is a really fun idea for the Timberwolves. And this isn't like the number one game-changing concept for the Timberwolves, but I do think this is a really good sign of the Timberwolves. They're going to be front thinking. They're going to be innovative. They're going to be trying to push forward things. They're really going to be committed to building not only a contender, but a highly modern and respectable organization. And I love the jump concept, and it's a great idea in my opinion. And I just think this is a sign, since the ownership just became official, we're going to have so much more we're going to learn. And the fan experience at the Minnesota Timberwolves games, it's probably going to be much more dynamic, modern, innovative, and just fun. Like the Glenn Taylor ownership, it wasn't very front thinking, right? Like what they say on Score North, it was kind of the mama papa shop. The stadium is old. It's the oldest in the league outside of Madison Square Garden. And I've been around quite a few stadiums in the NBA, and they're not that fantastic. Or Target Center isn't that fantastic compared to other ones. And I just think, they talked about like at the conference yesterday, their introductory conference as the official new owners, they're going to do it. They're going to eventually get a new stadium to align with the fact that the new goal is for the Minnesota Timberwolves to be a competitive and high-level organization. And it's pretty evident that a new stadium would line up with that vision, with that image, and it seems like they're committed to that. So I just thought the jump concept really stood out to me, because it's just a next step toward what seems like a more innovative, more dynamic Timberwolves organization. And another thing that stood out to me, there was a question about the conferences on Hoop Collective this morning, basically asking them, would you guys jump all in and move to the Eastern Conference if and when two expansion teams come into the NBA? And it seems like highly likely, highly speculative that it's going to probably be Seattle and Las Vegas. Here in Las Vegas right now, this spot could really use an NBA team. And A-Rod and Mark Lowry, they didn't seem as like jumpy toward the idea. I believe Mark Lowry said, be careful what you wish for. And I'm not entirely sure if that's just he providing respect to the Eastern Conference, what you might do politically, like never disrespect your competition or other organizations. And if that was the thinking process toward that answer, I would consider that smart. But we've all, as Timberwolves fans, a lot of us, including myself, a lot of us have been very interested in the idea of moving to the Eastern Conference. We see the talent disparity between the East and West, and we see an opportunity if Minnesota moves to the East. In my personal opinion, Minnesota is right there as a top-level contender in the Eastern Conference, and you're not competing with Shea and Luka and Wemby and maybe Cooper Flagg to go to the finals every year, right? You're playing maybe against Brunson, and Tatum's great, and Cunningham, who I think is on track to being one of the three best players in the Eastern Conference next year, and Orlando, et cetera, et cetera. Good players in the East, but clearly it's not the same as the West. In my opinion, Anthony Edwards goes to the Eastern Conference. He's the second best player in the conference right now. And depending on what happens with Giannis and how he ages at the time, Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves move to the Eastern Conference, I think Ant's going to be the best player in the East. So it seems like a highly intriguing opportunity. But they were like, be careful what you wish for. But they also said, like, if we did move to the Eastern Conference, Mark Lowry and A-Rod, they're East Coast guys. And they would like to not travel as much to go to road games. And I can respect that. Or be closer to home. Also respectable. So that really stood out to me. Just not being you know, impulsively eager toward the Eastern Conference. And both of them are highly intellectual, highly calculated. Who knows if they're all in on the East or not? And maybe they really love the Eastern Conference and that opportunity, but just don't want to express that out of just respect for the NBA and out of respect as being an official owner in the NBA. But that just stood out to me that they weren't like as jumpy on it as somebody like I would be, right? So I still think it's going to be a very interesting story to monitor as the NBA very likely expands over the next couple of years, because Minnesota is very much going to be a primary team in this conversation of moving to the Eastern Conference, not only because they are in the dead center in the country, because teams like New Orleans and Memphis also are, but also Minnesota travels more than any team in the NBA. The closest team in the division is Oklahoma City and Denver. And that's like, for Denver, that's a 14-hour drive. For Oklahoma City, that's a 12-hour drive. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous to have. So makes a ton of sense, because Memphis, like, you're not that far from Dallas. You're not that far from New Orleans. You're not that far from San Antonio. Minnesota has by far the most inconvenient traveling in the NBA. So Minnesota being in the Eastern Conference makes all sorts of sense to me. And I think it's going to be something to monitor. But it did stand out to me that they weren't just jumping at it. And to close out the show, I just want to say, if you haven't been to the Summer League, it is so fantastic. It's so fantastic. 60 to 70 bucks a day. You just come into the stadium, you watch whatever games you want. And I'm not kidding. For just connections, if you have interest in meeting players, building connections with NBA front office members, media members, it's such a fantastic spot. You know, NBA players, they're fluttering all over the place. Like, I remember when I went to Summer League a couple of years ago, and I'm just walking in the hall, and I just look up, I'm all like, okay, hi, Ben Simmons. And like, you just continue, and you have players kind of in an AAU style. They finish the game, and I see somebody like Oso Iguodaro just walking up the stands in shorts and a backpack. Players are everywhere. Media members are everywhere. And it's just a great way to just meet people in a style that's not that expensive. And a big stadium, Thomas and Mack, and then they have a smaller gym. And that smaller gym has kind of a college feel. It kind of feels like walking into the University of North Dakota, like the basketball court, where you have two rows or, you know, two stands that probably go 25 levels up, and it's louder. You know, the room is more compact, and you feel very integrated into the NBA community, and it's just fantastic. So if you haven't been to Summer League, highly recommend it. Anthony Edwards and Naz Reid, they just walk in. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I didn't see him, but I also heard he was in the room for the Nuggets game, which is, it's kind of sad, right? Because it shows the loyalty. He's still hanging out with his guys, even after being, you know, signed and traded to the Atlanta Hawks. And Nickeil's great. He's awesome. I think he's going to be so good in Atlanta. And I think he's going to be somebody who's going to help Atlanta be a finals contender potentially. So good for Nickeil. But to the main point, you're close to the players, just the community, the intimacy. It's fantastic, like absolutely fantastic. And it's just great. It's just great. Even a faraway seat in that smaller gym is pretty darn close. So I really enjoy, highly recommend anybody going out. I'm going to be in Las Vegas until the 20th. I'm part of a sports business classroom program that is ran by Bobby Marks of ESPN. And I'm just going to continue learning about the media side of the NBA, but also some of the financial side with the CBA. And it's going to be a very fun program, but I'm telling you guys this because I don't know exactly what my recording schedule is going to be. I still am trying to get some guests on while I'm in town, and I'm not entirely sure when the next episode is going to be, but whenever that episode is possible, even if it's at 1 or 2 in the morning and I have something at 7 in the morning, I promise I'm going to do that recording. Super tired because you know what? This is a grind, and I'm excited for the grind, and I care about providing a consistent product for you guys. And I'm just so thankful for all of you listening to this show, growing with this community. Wilder Wolves, I say Hall of Fame mode fandom for a reason. I want this to be a great Timberwolves fan community, and I'm just so thankful. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. This is Wilder Wolves, Hall of Fame mode fandom.